We
Okay,
are recording.
Yeah, Brian will be managing the recording as soon as I turn off my video camera.
And this is great because even if you don't get a lot of registrants today, they still can go to the MEEC website and click on to your presentation.
Great.
We're recording now. Good morning, Derek Smith from Morgan State. Welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So we have 11:02. Do you want to get started? I don't know how much information you have, so.
Sure, I think we're good to kick it off. We're going to be recording it so folks can watch it in your archive.
Right, I don't see camera yet. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. So let me start by saying good morning to MEEC and thank you for joining us this morning. Please join me as we welcome HCGi. And good morning to HCGi and thank you for presenting. The topic this morning will be information security for the education market, and presenting will be James Morrison, who is the cybersecurity from HPE Technologist. Hosting will be Bill Hennigan. And as I said, Tamara hasn't gotten on the call yet. So Bill, I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Pat. We appreciate everybody that's jumped on to watch this either live or in archive. Quick note on HCGi, we've now enjoying our 25th year serving MEEC members and have an extensive technology team in Maryland to assist you. We're going to be doing these every month, hopefully, and specifically next month we have one about navigating the new normal in Microsoft Intune products. But today we're really fortunate because of our partnership with HPE being a gold partner. They just have expertise in-house that comes to you for no charge. And so we're excited to put James Morrison with you today. He did 22 years with the FBI. He's not only in cybersecurity where we get information on best practices, but also be able to kind of tell you some of the challenges that are out there in the education market. So it's interactive. Please let James know, raise your hand if you have any questions. And again, thanks for tuning in. James, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. Actually, over the last 3 days, I've been meeting with different K-12s, talking about cybersecurity and where people are. And I'm out of the Houston area. And over the last 3 years of my FBI career, I was really focused on cybersecurity and not necessarily in the large enterprises, but really on K-12, higher education, and the SMB market, because the recognition that we had in the FBI even was that, we're working cases that are large, but we're not really doing a lot. We couldn't do a lot just because of manpower for the smaller organizations or organizations where financial loss wasn't as easily measured. So that became more of my focus is education. And so every opportunity I can get to come out and kind of talk about it. I hear the term the new normal or next normal, and that's kind of the terminology I've been using is I think we're going to go through a series of normals as we go forward, especially in technology. The amount of data that we're producing, the amount of data that's out there being created at our edge of our network is growing exponentially. I think I have a slide coming up, $175 million or 175 zettabytes of data will be produced by 2025 annually. That's an incredible number. And since most of that's being created at the edges of our network, we got to start thinking about security and how that's a challenge, because COVID really does change the conversation that we've had. What's also kind of interesting is I was reading reports yesterday, we're actually seeing a change in attack vector now. Phishing is not the main vector. Phishing has started to drop down because they're actually, especially across COVID, the hackers have been able to find more unsecured desktops or remote desktop protocols. So passwords are actually rising, and poor password security is actually becoming more of the norm that's causing a lot of our issues. So we've got to start recognizing that don't get me wrong, firewalls are great. But I had conversations with 10 or 11 school districts over the last 3 days, and 3 of them were like, well, I've got a firewall, so I'm okay. It's not enough. And if it's firewalls plus antivirus, still not enough. These attacks that we're seeing now are coming through software that's already installed on computer systems, RDP, PowerShell, and if you don't have the ability to sort of sniff out that traffic, you're going to find yourself hit with ransomware. And I really had a couple meetings yesterday that afterwards I kind of sat down and said, I really hope I don't see that school district being hit. School districts are targeted by ransomware. COVID has not changed that. And actually, like I said, I read, one of my jobs is to read the reports and to read, the tea leaves as to what's going on and where we think things are going. Email, we do see scam related emails still going on, business email compromise. School districts have fallen afoul of this. I know a couple cases here in Texas where a criminal was able to get into an email system and pretend like they were a person in that system and send invoices. And we had one school district up in northern Texas that lost millions of dollars in a construction project because somebody was able to go in and pretend they were, a administrator and send those invoices over, and they were fraudulent. So being able to sniff out that kind of traffic and watching those financial transactions. Most cybercrime is financially motivated. Probably 85% of it is looking for getting a quick bite of money. And school districts are not immune to that at all. So please we got to be aware of that. We were talking a little bit earlier about Zoom versus Teams. Zoom initially had a lot of troubles. I think Zoom has done a great job of changing its security and updating its security. However, so much of the security is still based upon the end users and the operators knowing how to implement it. And I was talking to one school district, and they were setting up Zoom calls, but the administrators didn't like all of the extra hoops they had to go through for security, so they were actually not setting a password, or the password was insecure. And the administrators were fighting this battle of going back and forth of saying, well, then you are taking responsibility for the lack of security. And the administrators were like, absolutely, we take responsibility. But that's not the way it needs to be. Security can't be something that we can phase out because it's inconvenient or because it slows down our processes. So we've got to start helping to make security more of that conversation, and making sure that when we're implementing security, we're doing it in a way that everybody can accept. Security is a culture. Cybersecurity is definitely a culture. And when I talk to school districts, of course, I recognize, when I first went to college, I was going to be a teacher. And so I have a lot of friends that are still in the teaching, the teaching sectors. And a recognition that school districts are caught from a budgetary standpoint within their district, as well as with the school board and the politics of that. And we also recognize that right now schools are mostly concerned, and this is absolutely the correct method, is getting a computer to every kid, making sure every child can access their education. And as schools start to transition into the idea of bringing some kids back to school, how's that going to work? How do we do it in a way that secures, the data, but also secures, make sure that people are physically safe as well? So that's the challenge of COVID as we go forward. There's the number, 175 zettabytes. School districts are big in this, right? Y'all are producing a lot of data, and the data is being produced closer to the edge. The conversation we've been having, though, is how do I make sure that the data itself is secure? We live in a world now also where we're having to deal more with privacy law. And right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, the California Consumer Privacy Act comes live on July 1, which is the most restrictive privacy law. And it requires school districts, as well as everybody else, to make sure that they're protecting the data of its students, of its employees, and of the parents of these students. So we have to start looking at data security. And like I said, school districts will find themselves afoul of this as well. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because 25 other states are considering privacy laws similar to CCPA, And my belief, and the belief of a lot of cybersecurity experts, is that over the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to see more privacy laws taking effect, in the United States. So security has to be built around data and how data is flowing. So that's been our challenge from an HPE standpoint. But I would also push that back and say that whoever is buying technology needs to make sure that they are having that appropriate conversation with their provider. First thing I tell people, and I told every school district I talk to, okay, have you had a security evaluation in the last 2 years? I would strongly encourage you to try to get an external security evaluation on your network, especially in light of the COVID pandemic. Whatever security you had built in prior to that has been stretched in a way that it wasn't designed for. We designed a lot of our networks around firewalls and everything being inside of the walls of our network. As we push these devices outside of our network, we may have put into VPNs, we may have put in some of that remote access, but security often wasn't pushed with it. And that's why the statistics show that 40% of desktops now are unsecured. Those people are connecting into your network. Those home users are now connecting in, and we have to make sure that that is part of the conversation as we move forward. I'm a systems guy. Prior to my Air Force FBI time, I was 8 years Air Force, working systems engineering, systems troubleshooting. So even from a security standpoint, I always say, let's look at it from a more holistic or systematic approach. Recognizing that data is the currency, and recognizing that from a criminal standpoint, they're focused on your data. So you have to know where your data is stored. You have to recognize where that, if it's in the cloud, where in the cloud. Who has responsibility for it? A lot of public cloud implementations that we've seen, people will go out to a cloud provider and say, I want 10 petabytes of data, and they provide it. Here you go. But the conversation never really evolves towards the idea of what data is being stored there and what security should be added on. That's why having a relationship with partners, is crucially important, because you may not have, and recognize this, every school district, every enterprise I've talked to feels a shortage of its IT personnel and its security personnel. That's normal, and that is part of the new and the next normal. So we have to start making sure that we're working with partnerships that can help us have the proper security conversations. Maybe you can't afford a security officer. That happens. But you can work with partners like HCGi to make sure that they may have the ability to provide you a virtual security officer. They can help you develop incident response plans. They can help you develop backup plans and test those. Any plan you make, Napoleon said that no plan survives, contact with the enemy. But we have to make sure that whatever plans we create, we actually test those plans, whether through a tabletop exercise or through an actual, actually taking things down and pretending like an actual attack has occurred. Ransomware isn't going to go away. I'll show you some more statistics on that. And the criminal enterprises are going to continue to make money off of us. And so we have to make sure data is our focus. And that when we look at data and we look at technology, the technology should have 3 goals with my data. It either protects my data against new vulnerabilities, it either detects and deters intruders quickly, or it helps me recover my data fast. Backups are a big part of ransomware recovery, but statistically 77% of backups fail when you need them. That's either because they're left exposed, that the criminal is able to access that data and then either encrypt your backups or delete those backups, or the backups were never done correctly to begin with. So that's why having a backup plan and making sure that you test your backups is really the world we live in. The reason I call it next normal and not necessarily the new normal is that I think we're going to start entering a phase where IT is going to transform at a faster rate. That's not good for a lot of industries, and especially around the K-12, because budgets are more linear, and sometimes budgets are, we get them once a year, and so what we have to start recognizing is ways to deploy products, deploy things like cloud, deploy things like edge computing in a way that can allow me to transform or move faster. That's where one of the things we offer is GreenLake. which takes cloud out of the CapEx model and puts it more into the OpEx model, where you pay on a monthly basis by usage. So you're not paying, you know, $1 million up front for servers. The servers are actually leased and controlled by HPE. All you have to worry about is how much cloud space you're using, and then we can help control those costs. Because IT costs, I mean, especially across COVID, you know, everybody was deploying Chromebooks, everybody was deploying laptops, they were doing whatever they could. So it really took those expenses really out of the normal control. And so we're always going to be in deficits now because of that. I think we're going to be paying the COVID debt for a while to come. Recognition also, though, that the adversary, the criminals that we're working against, are continuing to innovate. Ransomware in 2020 has changed. Maze and NetWalker are two good examples of that, where they're now stealing data in addition. So criminal adversaries are setting up websites out there on the internet called shame sites. And when they victimize someone and that person doesn't pay the ransom, they will put their name on this shame site to try to cause reputational damage and cause regulatory damage. So companies that are maybe under privacy law or data breach notification laws are finding themselves called out by the shame sites, and then they end up getting caught by regulators saying, "Oh, by the way, you should have reported that to us. Here's a fine." The other problem with ransomware was an announcement a couple weeks ago by the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department of the United States now says that if you pay ransom to an organization that is on their watch list or their block list, you could be fined because you're providing material support to a terrorist or a criminal organization overseas. That's just an additional hump that we have to get over. And so we've got to start finding better ways to avoid paying the ransom, or we're going to find ourselves afoul of state regulators, we're going to find ourselves afoul of federal regulation, as well as you know, school boards and stuff like that. So our business, our schools are going to depend more and more on security, and that's just the reality. Cybercrime has risen at an exponential rate. I'm not sure if I have the slide in, but last year estimated between 1.5 and $2 trillion to the global economy. Next year, 2021, which is only a couple months away, really weeks away, it's estimated that by the end of 2021, the cost will be somewhere around $6 trillion. So that the cyber criminals are not going to go away because this is incredibly lucrative. It's actually so lucrative that there are indications that drug cartels are now getting involved in cybercrime because it's easier, and it's actually less likely for them to get caught doing cybercrime than it is for them moving drugs. So we have to start getting better and demanding better innovation. And as I said, the problem though is that while we're seeing an exponential rise in cybercrime, our budgets are remaining relatively flat. So my encouragement to every end user, whether it's a K-12, whether it's a any enterprise, we have to have better conversations about proper investment. Whatever products you're deploying need to be, first of all, need to map into what you see as your IT transformation. If you feel remote work, if your IT plan is that remote school is going to become more of my norm, then whatever security product you are deploying has to be able to protect me at that new endpoint. Because your new endpoint now is this computer sitting at someone's home coming in through a very slow connection. So I may not be able to put a endpoint security product on that machine just because it will slow down their traffic too much. So maybe it's something more like sniffing the traffic once it comes into my network. This is why also we're having more conversations around multi-factor authentication. And I asked every school district that I've talked to over the last 3 days, where are you on multi-factor authentication? This is something that needs to be deployed, not just inside of your school district and inside of your executive offices, but even more importantly, closer to the edge by your teachers especially. But if we can get down to the student level, we can do it in a way that makes it easier and doesn't add too much additional cost or additional features. I mean, even using a phone, you can actually have a two-factor authenticator on a person's phone that they can get a 6-digit code every time they log in. That step alone goes a long way to securing our networks. But but we need to know, first of all, what our new normal is going to look like, or next normal is going to look like, which means we have to start setting our plans. And then we spend a lot of money on perimeter controls, firewalls and routers. Don't get me wrong, they're great, they're necessary, but in the end, what we found out that is in today's world, firewalls are not as effective at stopping cybercrime as things like user analytics, zero trust and advanced identity and access control, and machine learning and intelligence systems. So having those conversations, I think, is going to become more important. Right now, the average is 78 days. This was at the end of 2019. I'm waiting to see what the new Mandiant report is as to whether or not these numbers have gone down in 2020. I'm estimating they will go up in 2020 because we don't have people at work. People are now remote, so it's less likely for them to notice some of the, the malicious traffic that's happened, inside of networks. What's also kind of scary from a standpoint, from all of our standpoints, is ransomware is now going after servers and databases and internal strong or crucial areas of our network. Because of that, they know that you're more likely to pay the ransom if I get a server than an endpoint. And so we've seen the amount of payment for ransomware actually climbing. And this year we've started to see $1 million payouts. The average in the end of 2019 for ransomware was a $250,000 payout. They don't care if you can afford it. Some of them might negotiate it, but in the end, they know that you have cybersecurity insurance, and they're expecting you to go to your insurance company and pay that ransom. Two issues with that, though, is that insurance companies are starting to push back on providing ransomware security. They know that it's becoming too expensive for them. And when you get a cybersecurity policy now, there will typically be 12 to 15 different things you have to do to verify that you are ready to implement that cybersecurity insurance. And I know of a number of cases where school districts have gone back to their cybersecurity insurance, and when they've come back and said, no, we're not paying the ransom because you didn't do phishing testing, or you didn't have an incident response plan, or you didn't have a backup plan. So cyber insurance is part of it, but we've got to recognize that they are going to try to nickel and dime it or save themselves money by nitpicking on those policies. So last year, across an entire cyber attack, the average loss was 13 million. But you can see there, right in the beginning of 2020, we've seen losses rise to about 250,000 on average for ransomware payments. The second quarter of 2020, that number rose again because, like I said, we did see $1 million payouts. We actually saw two large enterprises, Garmin and Honda Motors, that they're not revealing how much they paid for ransomware, but there's an estimate. There are some people saying they may have paid multiple millions of dollars to get their data back. So it's just our reality. So please be aware, RDP, remote desktop protocol, especially in small businesses, in K-12 environments, higher education environments, and municipalities, is the most common way they're going to come into your network. They're going to either brute force a password, or they're going to get through a managed service provider and then steal that access from them. We all view ransomware as a high risk, but many of us still don't feel prepared to deal with it. If you view ransomware as a high risk, and I feel you should, there has to be some sort of step taken towards ransomware protection. It could be a simple, make sure my backups are secure. In the military, we had what we call the 3-2-1 rule: 3 backups, 2 mediums. One of those backups had to be stored in either an air-gapped network, so it had no physical connection, or was an immutable signature. That's the new term that we're calling it. That backup cannot be overwritten, cannot be deleted, cannot be rewritten. There are technologies out there that allow for that. Cybersecurity programs, school districts are often not able, because of manpower, to actually have a separate security body. And if that's the case, then that's where we may have to talk with partnerships to make sure that maybe they can help us get a temporary or a part-time cybersecurity body. We call them virtual CISOs, right? Virtual security officers. And you could pay for a very minor, a very small amount to just help you establish policies, set up phishing testing, and even testing those policies. That's actually our reality. So the reality also is that everyone's a target. Cybercrime rule number 1 says every company, every enterprise, every school district is a target. The way criminals will often do their attacks is they will buy email addresses that have been verified as being real, and they will launch an attack against all of those email addresses. When someone clicks on that email, or when they get hit through a remote RDP attack, so they're buying RDP keys so they can actually log into corporate or into networks. Once they get in, they launch the ransomware. They're not even sure necessarily whose network they're in until you contact them and say, "Oh, I'm a school district." Well, you're taking your chances that they're going to help you or reduce the amount of ransom they're requesting. Also, the thing if you decide that your idea is to pay the ransom, it's a 50-50 proposition that they won't even give you a key anyways. You'll pay the ransom and they won't provide you a key. So ransomware, these cyber threats are not going to go away. They're coming from outside the United States, which was a huge hamper, to the FBI's efforts to reduce cyber crime. And they're working out of countries that in many cases may have the tacit approval of the government that they operate from. So this isn't going to go away. So what we have to do is demand better innovation, better technology, and mitigate the threat. I want to quickly go through this. This was a Ponemon report that HPE had commissioned earlier in the year. I don't know if it was ever published, but what they recognized is that there were 7 habits of highly effective security organizations. The first one was the recognition that in any transformation, security has to be built into that transformation. If you're deploying new products, every product you add to your network adds risk. It adds a security, it could be a new vulnerability, or it could be enhance my security. But everything has an impact on my security. When we tie that into the idea of risk management, every enterprise, every K-12 has a different appetite for risk. And so as I'm moving through these same transformations, I have to recognize that risk is built into my transformation as well. Now, when we look across these last 2, it also means that security and risk are tied together. Security and risk are often really the conversations we have before we talk about that transformation. But if we recognize it, we can move at a pace that doesn't go faster than how our appetite for risk is. Using automation. We don't have enough people, and I think we've said that. Security operations are always going to be behind the need that we feel. So if we're deploying products that give us increased automation, that help us actually make better security decisions, that actually help us make policies that are enforceable by access control, we can use automation to make ourselves more secure. And then zero trust. I've been a huge advocate for zero trust. I think it has to be part of our conversation as we move forward in security architectures. So if you're looking at doing a large scale architecture, which I know most K-12s are not right now, but there are implementations or there are parts of zero trust that you could start to implement and get towards that goal. Machine learning as a decision-making tool. This is, I think, where we, like, for example, talking about contact tracing, which is a big aspect now of what we're looking at with bringing people back into workplaces and bringing people back into K through 12. How do we use machine learning to make better data analysis? We've deployed some products that use cameras and heat sensing cameras to try to take temperatures, or at least skin temperatures, of employees in particular enterprises. From that, we can track when somebody has a high temperature, and then you could deploy a nurse or something to actually take a temperature on that person, and then maybe that can help limit the spread of COVID should there be an outbreak, and mitigate that damage as well. So there's a lot more technology out there that can help us make better decisions. Cyber insurance, there is a value of cyber insurance. It's not just in paying for ransomware, it's also in helping us recognize what the reputational damage to our environment might be. Recognizing liability, forensic support. Maybe they have an incident response team on retainer. somebody I can talk to when something goes bad that can give me advice in that first 24 hours. But cyber insurance is valuable, but there's a lot more value to it rather than just paying the ransom. And then the recognition that security and privacy are tied together. There is a relationship there, even though they are separate. If I have a strong security posture, my privacy posture is probably secure as well. So there is a relationship there that we have to recognize. So I'm gonna go kind of briefly into kind of HP's mindset about security. We've looked at, what we look at is, how do I protect the data? And I talked earlier about the idea of data security. And so first, there's a recognition that in any network, your data really exists in 3 states: at rest, in flight, and in use. And I've got to be able to protect the data in all 3 of those states. So at rest is typically encryption, maybe bulk encryption on a server or on a storage device. And so some of our products have self-encrypting drives, so that if somebody pulled a drive out of a machine, it wouldn't be useful to them. Protecting data in flight. There are encryption modules, there are VPNs, there's all sorts of products that we can use to help make sure that the data, as it moves from edge to cloud, for example, or moves from the edge into your data center, is secure so that somebody can't sniff that data. And then the data in use. Data at rest, right? So, or data in use is the idea of data sitting in memory, in RAM, in cache. How do I protect it on that server? And then how do I secure the platform? That's the secondary prong here. I got to trust my server. I got to make sure that the server is resilient, and I have to have visibility and control. And everything I do has to be able to be done without compromising performance. As I talked about earlier, if I deploy a security product that compromises performance, operational needs will supersede security needs. So we have to be able to do all of that without compromising that performance. So we have this conversation, this security conversation across all product lines. We try to identify and understand the risks, and then put safeguards and controls to help us protect that data. So when we talk about, we have a product called Silicon Root of Trust, and I'm going to go quickly through it. It's unique to us. Now there are some of our competitors that have provided something called Hardware Root of Trust, but I'll show you how ours is different and how our product has been tested outside of our company. So it's not just us saying that our product is good. We've actually had it tested from others, from external pen tests. So what we looked at is when we were looking at security and a lot of security products, most security products sit at the apps, the OS, and the VM layer, but don't do a whole lot to protect the hypervisor, the BIOS, and the CPU. So we are the only server manufacturer in the world that actually creates our own silicon. What that means also is that when your server first boots up, the first place it accesses data is at your silicon level, the BMC. Our BMC is created by us. It's called ILO. ILO 5 is our current version of it. But because we control that silicon, we know that nobody has inserted malicious code into that process. And then from there, we can store a fingerprint of your server on that chip and boot the server all the way through and validate that nobody has modified that server. I said earlier that hackers are going after servers. I actually sent a warning internal to HPE first week of October that we've seen hackers going after firmware and BIOS on servers and workstations. So if you don't have the ability to check that firmware or that BIOS, you're not going to know that somebody has inserted something malicious. Now, this is not done just at boot, and this is another differentiator. We also know that these criminals are trying to deploy this stuff inside of those servers while the server is running. So we also, through a product called ILO Advanced, we can check to make sure that your server is not being modified while it's running. So that's a big differentiator. So Silicon Root of Trust, add on our ILO Advanced, will actually help us, will help validate that your server has not been messed with while it's running. So another thing we did, announcement we made on actually October 1st, was the recognition that supply chains are becoming more susceptible to attack. There was a thing called the Big Hack a couple of years ago, where it looked like somebody had put additional chips onto servers or onto motherboards that were created outside the United States. And those additional chips actually were stealing data that was coming across the network. So what we did was we now are the only server manufacturer in the world that can create an entire line of servers inside the United States. On October 1, we announced that our 380 server it can be made at scale, not just onesies, twosies. We can make as many as you need in our Chippewa Falls plant in Wisconsin. We are, again, the only server manufacturer that can do that. And we are going to be expanding this product line to other servers in time. So we think that there's a lot more conversation now around buying products that are made in the USA. And so we think this is going to be, kind of a game changer. So what we did was, and this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier as well, when HPE came out and said that they felt they had a very secure server, they decided to take that server out to a third-party pen testing company called Infusion Points. And they provided a copy of our new Gen 10 server and compared that server to 3 of our competitors. What Infusion Points came back and told us after a few months of testing was that our server was 2 generations ahead of any other server out there on the marketplace. We've maintained that edge. So if you get into a conversation with someone else saying, oh, a server is a server is a server, that's not true. We have built security and baked security into every level of our server, so that we are now 2 generations ahead, and we are now considered the world's most secure industry standard server. Now, what we did, we decided that since data was being created more at the edge, we formed a partnership with a company called Pensando. And what Pensando did was Pensando recognized that as we want to, let's say you want to put a server at one of your schools, how do you secure that server, and how do you make sure that the data as it transits from your school into your main data center is secure? So what we did was, this is a product that is completely encapsulated into a network card. So this network card, and they are now being deployed inside of HPE servers as of June 1st, will do full stateful firewall capabilities, full encryption, full load balancing, and micro-segmentation at the card level. So we're not stealing any ability of the server to modify or process data. This is all offloaded to the card. So this card can be purchased at a rate, I believe right now it's under $1,000 per card. But what we hope to be able to do is that if you have to deploy a firewall at a school to secure the network, you don't have to do that anymore. Now the server itself, every server can be its own firewall, can be its own load balancer, can be its own encryption mechanism. And that's why we think the Pensando card is going to have a huge conversation piece going forward. Even recently, AMD purchased a company called Xilinx, which is producing a similar card to this. So a lot of companies are moving into this space. And so this is going to be more conversation. Lastly, we also felt that our product was so secure and so differentiated that we went to Marsh Insurance, which is an insurance company out of New York, and asked them to evaluate our product and compare it against other products. They were creating a program called Cyber Catalyst, and in 2019, they evaluated 150 products to see whether or not those products actually had a meaningful impact on cyber risk. They came back after a few months and said that out of those 150 products, only 17 of them actually help reduce cyber risk. And we were happy to note that our Gen 10 Silicon Rooted Trust was listed as one of those 17 products. In addition, the Aruba Policy Enforcement Firewall, which is part of HPE, and that part of their zero trust model, was also recognized. So what that means is that if you're looking at cybersecurity insurance and you have deployed in the majority in your network HPE products, they will give you positive terms and conditions on your cybersecurity insurance. So we are recognized by third-party security companies. We are recognized by insurance companies as having a product that does reduce cyber risk. With that, that's the end of the presentation, but I don't know if anybody has any questions for me about really cybersecurity in general or HPE specifically.
Those features that you talked about, I know you mentioned that they're on a Gen 10 HP platform. What about the other generations? What can we do to shore up those Gen 9 and Gen 8 machines that we might have?
So the ILO 4, which was the previous, I think that's in the 8 and the 9s. You can still plug that into InfoSight. You can still plug that into some of our analytics, data analytics products, and we'll still gather security data about them. The only thing that they won't have is they won't have that secure fingerprint through the boot process. And they will not have the ability to recover a server while the server is running. So that's the big change from the 9 to the 10.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but we do have the ability. I mean, and in the future, of course, trade-in type stuff, so that because we're trying to help people make that transition from 9 to 10, and we've actually now are launching what we call 10 plus, which is the AMD processors. And the AMD processors are adding in a number of additional security features that help secure endpoint virtual machines and hypervisors. So we're moving forward on the Gen 10 Plus as well now.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we'd love to have the conversation with you. I definitely don't want to shut that down because we have account executives that could try to make it palatable, I guess, right, within people's budgets, because we want to help you get to a better security model, and we're willing to kind of work with you on that.
Well, the other interesting thing was you talked about the backups and having backups in case of ransomware, and how the backups aren't being done properly. We just purchased a Store Once appliance, and that was one of the major reasons why I purchased that box. And we're also using Veeam, so we should have an edge on. We haven't stood it up yet, but the goal is between Veeam and Store Once, we'll be able to make sure that we are not that our data is backed up properly, and in case of ransomware, we can do a restore. So
absolutely.
Yeah, we have realistic.
We have a great relationship with Veeam, and Veeam's got some great support there. So I think you're right. I think that definitely is moving you closer to the security model. I think you'll be happier with.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hey, Jay.
Yeah.
I have a question. I had just a customer said something to me the other day about security, and they said they're advising people to eliminate or delete browser history, and that should help with things. And I was like, well, I guess that helps, but that's not the end all be all. I mean, is deleting browser history like something you may recommend on a minute level?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I tell an end user.
Yeah.
But at an enterprise level,
no,
I wouldn't put that as something I would. It wouldn't be in my top 10. Let me put it that way, right?
Okay.
I mean, I'd be talking incident response plan, multi-factor authentication, phishing testing, closing down RDP or at least securing RDP better. Browser history, that's a little further down the list.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, and that cybersecurity stuff that you insurance. Do you know how they vet a potential client?
That's a huge question right now. In some cases, they really don't. They give you a questionnaire. You fill out the questionnaire, and they take it at face value. But insurance companies
use it if you have to use it.
Right, but that's the thing is then, so when you go to use it, they'll say, oh, there's 15 things that you need to have done in order to cash out this policy. So I equate that to like, okay, you have let's say you have a car insurance policy. And so
I equate that to bait and fish, or what do you call it?
Well, phishing testing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or bait and switch, yeah.
Bait and switch, that's it.
Well, right, but you have to read the policy. So it'd be like, and so it'd be like your auto policy that says, okay, here's 15 things you have to have done in order to get your car restored after an accident. And one of them would be, did you do an oil change within the last 3,000 miles? What? And that's, so you have to be very cautious about the policy and make sure you recognize what your responsibilities are to get that payout.
Okay. And my last question is about when data is returned. I would imagine there's no guarantee that data hasn't been replicated.
No, there's no guarantee. Matter of fact, I wouldn't trust them. I mean, they're criminals.
Right.
And even if they give you the ransomware key, you still have to reload your entire network. we've had a number of cases where they were reinfected because, well, you didn't reload those machines, and so we saw we were still in the network, and they reinfected them with a virus and said, well, guess you have to repay us.
Okay.
So yeah, even if you pay the ransom, you're not done.
No.
You got to go through and take everything down, reload every computer, every laptop, every server, printer, router, IoT device. We've had ransomware store itself in a thermostat of a casino and then reinfect a network. It's just the nature of the world.
Thermostat isn't changing the temperature device?
Yeah, so they had an IoT thermostat. They had a Nest thermostat device.
Oh, those. Okay.
And they had stored the ransomware inside that product.
Goodness.
James,
My
this is
last
Bill
question
Hangen.
was-
This is
oh,
Bill
sorry.
Hangen with HCGi. Thanks again for this whole presentation. We do offer this service now where we will look at your insurance compliance and be able to help them in specific areas with multi-factor authentication, things like that. So as a leaping off point from here, anybody that wants to have a one-on-one conversation, we can take some of the bring in some of the HPE specialists as well to just talk about navigating and taking off just one part of this if it's multi-factor authentication.
And absolutely, and Anita, if you have any, you can email me also, or inbox, or Skype me for any questions you have. I mean, I'm always willing to talk about it. So
Great, I appreciate that because I work very closely with Derek, who had asked the questions previously about ILO 4.
Yep.
So we may need to get into a deeper conversation about that at some point. I appreciate it.
absolutely.
Thank you.
James, I have a question around ransomware and the payment method. It's my understanding from what I've read that most of that is through Bitcoin. Is that
Absolutely. 90% is, well, not just Bitcoin, but cryptocurrency. Yeah, 95% is cryptocurrency.
Thank you.
And that's actually one of the things that's actually catapulted it up is cryptocurrency has made it a lot easier for them to get paid and really hide those transactions. Cryptocurrency is hard to track, especially when it's going through exchanges that are outside the United States.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Great. Well, if there's no more questions, we can wrap things up and follow up, please, with any inquiries you have. Again, thank you very much, James.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, this is Pat Collins again from MEEC. Thank you very much for the presentation, HCGi. Thank you, James, for a great presentation. Brian or Bill, if you send that over to us, as I said earlier, it'll be posted to the MEEC website. For instance, even those that weren't able to sign on that registered this morning, that way they can go to the website and still get that, or I'll send it to them.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
All right, you as well.
Good job, everyone.